Reminder for those of you who are new to Transportation Energy Partners, we provide policy support to the nation's Clean Cities coalitions and our many industry stakeholders in the clean transportation industry. We keep coalitions and stakeholders informed of federal policies, programs, and funding opportunities, and we educate key policymakers about the importance of advancing markets for cleaner vehicles and fuels. For those of you who did attend this year's Energy Independence Summit back a few weeks ago, we appreciated your participation. For those of you who weren't able to come this year, here's what you missed. We had a great crowd of Clean Cities coalition and industry leaders. We had over 240 meetings with congressional offices. We had presentations on the VW settlement, updates on that, and also heard directly from Electrify America about their program. We had several roundtables with industry leaders and federal policy experts, and then we also had roundtable discussions with key federal agencies. So for those of you who were there, thank you. For those of you who weren't able to make it, we hope you will join us next year, next February. Quick review of clean transportation victories that were achieved with leadership from the clean transportation industry and participation from Transportation Energy Partners, Clean Cities coalitions, and many others. I think most of you know that the tax incentives were extended for alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure through 2017 retroactively. Unfortunately, so far we have not been able to extend them through 2018 or beyond, though we are pushing for that. The renewable fuel standard was finalized for 2018 and through 2019 for biomass-based diesel. We were able to maintain Clean Cities funding at the $34 million level through FY 2017. We're still working on 2018, which is our current year, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we were able to increase funding for the EPA clean diesel grants in FY 2017, up $10 million to $60 million. And again, FY 18 has not been decided yet. Again, our priorities for the current year in terms of federal policies are to continue to maintain increased funding for the Clean Cities program and the Clean Diesels program, to have a longer term extension for the various tax incentives, to continue to preserve the renewable fuel standard for next year, to fight off changes in the Congress, and to then continue to see volumes increase for next year. If there does happen to be an federal infrastructure initiative, we are working to include alternative fuels infrastructure in that initiative. And finally, some of you may know that there's a logjam of approvals at the Federal Highway Administration in terms of CMAQ funding for clean fuel vehicles, and we are working to break that logjam, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Again, I've just talked about our funding priorities, which are funding for Clean Cities and the EPA Clean Diesel grants. And this is a little complicated because we are still working on finalizing funding levels for the current fiscal year, which is fiscal year 2018. Now, fiscal year 2018 started on October 1st, 2017 and goes through September 30th, of this year, 2018. So we are in the middle of fiscal year 2018. And so we're trying to wrap up and see final decisions on funding levels for the current fiscal year. And then we are beginning work on the funding levels for fiscal year 2019. So we're going to talk about both of those. In terms of the current fiscal year, both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees have passed all of their bills. Currently, Congress is funding the government at last year's levels through March 23rd. A few weeks ago, they reached an agreement that would increase budget cap levels for the current fiscal year and for the next fiscal year. So that gives it's a little less budget pressure than it's been in previous years in terms of determining funding levels. And we are hopeful that Congress will finalize the actual detailed funding levels for the programs for the current fiscal year by March 23rd, which is a little more than 2 weeks away. So they're in final discussions over negotiations over the current year's funding levels, and we're hopeful that they will finish that by March 23rd. In terms of where things set for the current fiscal year, again, last year you can see for the Clean Cities program in FY17, which is the last fiscal year, there was $34 million for the program, including $15 million for grants. We're proposing for FY18 $40 million and $20 million in grants. The president proposed 0 for fiscal year 2018. The House included 0, but it did include some supportive language for the program and language that we had recommended about grants, which is a good thing. So at least they're supporting the program. And the Senate included $28 million for Clean Cities, including $24 million for grants. So we have been working with the House and Senate trying to get them to increase the funding up to at least $40 million, and that hopefully at worst case we would end up at last year's level of $34 million. And we're trying to get our language for grants, which would include funding at $500,000 would encourage the department to fund deployment grants at $500,000 to $1 million per grant, which would be smaller levels, so more entities could participate in grant-funded deployment projects. And we're also recommending that there be at least one Clean Cities Coalition be a partner in the competitive grants. For the diesel emission grants, little more optimistic, or we're in a little stronger position going into final negotiations. You can see the last year's level was $60 million. The president's budget included $10 million. The House is recommending $75 million. And the Senate is recommending $40 million. So again, we are hopeful that we'll, at the very least, be at last year's level of $60 million and maybe get a modest increase. We had recommended $100 million for the diesel grants. So hopefully, again, fiscal year 2018, the current fiscal year, will be completed by March 23rd, and if not by then, very shortly thereafter. So what I really want to focus on, and where we really need your help, is on the fiscal year 2019, which will be next year's budget, and fiscal year 2019 starts October 1st. So here's the timeline and process for 2019. Number one, the president proposed his his budget, the administration's budget, a few weeks ago in February, about 3 weeks ago. Their budget, unfortunately, included 0 for clean cities and $10 million for the EPA clean diesel program. In terms of the timeline, the way the process works is that each individual member of Congress can submit their requests to the key appropriation subcommittees, and I'll talk specifically about the deadlines, but essentially the House deadlines are coming up very quickly at the end of next week, March 16th, and the Senate deadlines have not been determined yet, but they are likely to be in the first week or two of April. Then the appropriation subcommittees will actually write their legislation, the subcommittees and committees, but the key action is actually in the subcommittees, and that will happen in April, as early as April in the House, and and be completed by June. Then hopefully the House and Senate will take their bills to the floor in the summer, and then the final legislation will be completed in the fall. I think the likely scenario would be great. It's possible that things will all be done, by October 1. That's unlikely, but it's possible. But I'm hopeful that things, at least this year, will be completed by around Thanksgiving or at the very latest before the Christmas break in December. So that's the overall timeline. Here are some key appropriations leaders, just so you know. And again, I want to give a shout out to, your colleagues, Jonathan Overly in Tennessee, and his stakeholders and team of people who played a key role in working with Senator Alexander, who's the chairman of the Senate Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee. In particular, Richard Battersby and the East Bay Clean Cities Coalition, and the other 11 other coalitions in California who've been critical in winning support from Senator Feinstein, Alicia Cox, and her colleagues, her board, and her stakeholders for working with Congressman Simpson from Idaho, Sam Spofford, Jason Phillips, and their team in Ohio, who've been key in working with Marcy Kaptur, the New Mexico folks who've worked with Congressman Udall, the Western Riverside folks and other folks in Southern California who've worked with Congressman Calvert, and Lisa Thurston in Minnesota, who's developed a great relationship with Congresswoman McCollum. Everybody's support is important, but if you're fortunate to have a chairperson or ranking member who happens to be from your state, you are very important, and we thank you for your leadership on behalf of Clean Cities coalitions in the clean transportation industry all over the country. Here are our recommendations for the Clean Cities program for the next fiscal year, which is $50 million for the program, which would provide increased funding for grants for vehicle and infrastructure deployment programs. Specifically, we're requesting $30 million for competitive grants. So basically that means $20 million would go to basic support for the coalitions, which includes, and stakeholders, which would include $4 million in direct funding to the coalitions, and then about $16 million for technical assistance, training, lab work, things like fueleconomy.gov, the alternative fuel station locator, the A-Fleet tool, the Tiger teams, the mentoring program, all those kinds of things that support coalitions around the country. And then again, we are requesting language that would encourage the department to give grants at the $500,000 to $1 million level per grant, and that coalition, at least one coalition should be a project participant. To give you a brief sense of, here's the funding history for the program. Again, last year, fiscal year 17 is 34 million for the program. And then here is our specific language, which I just went over, but you don't need to read this. We have this for you. And then for the EPA clean diesel grants, we're recommending we recommended 100 million for FY18. Again, I already talked about this, but here gives a little history. And then we're recommending again 100 million for FY19. So again, our strategy is to have coalitions and your stakeholders send letters, either request letters, or many offices have what are called appropriation request forms. And basically what we want you to do is request that your individual members of the House and the Senate submit requests of our proposed language to the appropriation subcommittees, and then to follow up with a phone call to make sure that they actually submit our request. And that has been the key to our success so far, is to get individual members, as many as possible, request that the appropriation subcommittees include our language. And so far that's been effective, and we just need to do the same thing again this year. So here are the deadlines. So especially in the House, the key deadline is March 16th. Individual members of the House have to submit their requests for the Clean Cities to the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, and for the EPA Clean Diesel grants to the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. So that means that we need to be getting our requests in to the individual members of Congress immediately. Now, we've been working with many of you to get your requests in, and we are available to help you. I mean, even if you've missed your individual member deadline, it's still worth trying to get requests in. So please do that immediately. I mean, you need to be working on that. Some deadlines have passed. Most deadlines are this week. Many deadlines are this coming Friday. So now is really the time to get your requests in. Now, some of the offices have a form that they ask you to fill out, and some just will take a letter. We have a sample letter, and we can also help you fill out your forms. Now, the Senate, individual Senate offices have some deadlines right now, and some will be a little later because the Senate subcommittee deadlines have not been set yet, and they're likely not to be till early April. They'll probably be after the congressional recess, which will be in early mid-April. So again, the key next steps are be in contact with your House and Senate offices, find out what their deadlines are, fill out a request form if they have a form, or send in a request letter as soon as possible. We're going to send out another email blast later today or first thing tomorrow, which will give you a link to the sample letter. If you can get stakeholders to sign onto your letter, that would be great. And then follow up. It's very important to give a phone call back. Ask for the legislative director or the staff member who handles energy and environmental appropriations, and talk to them on the phone and make sure they got your request, make sure they understand your request, and make sure that they're going to actually submit your request to the congressional subcommittees. Again, this is a critical year. So far, at least for Clean Cities and the EPA DERA program, the administration has not been supportive. So that's the bad news. And that can change over time. But They didn't request, they requested 0 for clean cities and only 10 million for EPA clean diesel grants. But the good news is that the federal budget caps have actually been increased for this year and next year. So that gives a little more room to operate, number one. And number two, Congress is, it's ultimately up to Congress on these funding levels. And so it's critical that we work with the Congress to show them our broad-based support from folks in the industry. Very briefly, we're going to continue to work on tax incentives, energy legislation, if that happens, and infrastructure legislation. Also, we did meet a group of us that led by Alan Harned from Virginia Clean Cities, and then we also had participation from NGV America, from Clean Fuels Ohio, from folks in Kansas City, from the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, working to help free up stalled CMAQ funds for clean vehicle projects. And I think we're making a little headway there, at least for backlog funding. And then we still need to make sure that they continue to process the funding on a going forward basis. So we'll continue to work on that as well. Again, thanks to our sponsors. Here's my contact information and my colleague and assistant Jacob's contact information, and we are available. So I want to see if we got any questions from anyone. Will these slides be available? Yes. Any discussions concerning the future of the very successful Clean Cities National Parks Initiative? I have not heard any discussion of that. So we will, I know that's been successful. I know many coalitions have participated in that effort, and we will bring that up with our friends at DOE and encourage them to continue that successful initiative. Do we have any other questions? One thing I know that for some Clean Cities coalitions, either because of the organization you're housed in or because of your tax status, it may be difficult for you to directly to submit appropriations requests. If that's the case, please contact us anyway, and we will work with you. We can submit the requests, and then we can refer to the local coalitions as we can talk about the successes of your program, how the program helps you, and just include you as a source of information to respond to questions. We do that with many coalitions, so we can work with you to make sure that people know, or we can work with you to encourage your stakeholders to submit a letter with the request that raves around your program. But I cannot say enough how important it is for you to be in touch with your congressional offices and ask them to request our language. It makes a huge, 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 huge difference. It makes all the difference in the world. Do we have any other questions? Please type your questions in. Can you? Somebody asked if there are any new pending Clean Cities coalitions that are going to be designated soon. I do not know the answer to that. I'd recommend that you ask the Department of Energy. Can you email the letters form to all participants? Yes, we can give you a sample letter. If the congressional offices have a form, they each have their own form, so we can't necessarily get those for you. If you contact us, we may be able to help you get the form for your members, your congressional and Senate offices, so we can do that. So that was another question. And we can email a link to the sample letters that you can use. Do we have any other questions? Please type in your questions if you have them. Let's see. Somebody said, I sent my letter to our congressional delegation. I have a good contact at the senator's office. Is a call all I need to do? I would say 2 calls would be good. This is from Colin in New Mexico. Thank you, Colin, for your support, ongoing support. I would say 2 calls. One is a call to your Santa Fe contact, and then I will get you the contact in the Washington office. So I would call the Washington office as well. I would make a follow-up call to both offices and urge them to support Clean Cities and for you particularly the diesel grants as well, because Senator Udall is the senior Democrat on the subcommittee that funds EPA and the clean diesel grants. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions. Again, please email Jacob or me if you have questions, concerns, you need more information, or you need help. We're here to help you participate effectively in the process. Again, the slides and the recording of the webinar will be up on the website. Either later today or at the latest first thing tomorrow. And we will also be sending out an email blast to everybody that will include a link to the sample appropriations request letter with our language on Clean Cities. And we'll also get you one on EPA diesel grants as well. So with that,
what should they do if they reach out to their congressman and their deadline already passed?
Here's another question, which is, what if you reach out to your congressional office and their deadline has already passed? You should beg and plead and say, apologize, I didn't know the deadline was this early, and this is really important to us. Could we please submit a request, and we apologize for missing the deadline, because they do have time. They have till March 16th on the House side to meet their deadline, and the deadlines on the Senate side have not even been set. So, and most offices will still take a request even if it's after their deadline. Some are rigid, but almost all will still take your request, particularly if you beg and plead and request nicely. Got one more final question, which is, what is Department of Energy Secretary Rick Perry's position on the Clean Cities program? To be honest, I don't think the Secretary has a position either way on the program. Thus far, the administration in their budget has not requested funding for the program, so they have not made it a priority. At the same time, they have continued to implement the program with funding at last year's level in the current fiscal year, even though the budget hasn't been finalized. So I really don't think we know what he thinks about the program. The most important thing right now is to maintain congressional support and congressional funding for the program, and that's really the most important thing. And if we get Congress to do that, we will be able to continue to work effectively with folks in the department to see that the program is implemented effectively. So as long as we continue to get good support from both Republicans and Democrats, as we have in the past for the program, we will continue to have a successful and effective federal program. And that goes for both Clean Cities and for the EPA diesel grants. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your participation. I know you all have busy lives. And again, please contact us if you need any help or assistance or have questions or need more information. With that, thanks everybody and have a great day. Take care. Bye.